Banania. Nerds in Paradise. One Thursday morning, Ms. Emelina Johnson, affectionately known as Ms. Emma, Banania's one and only post person, had yet another delivery to do at the island's cricket club. So off she drove in the post office mini moke with Singleton, her dog. But this time she was accompanied by her newly acquired friend Rachel Nickleby, who was visiting her son Nigel, founder of the recently established Digibeat, Banania's first and only high-tech company. The lady's mission was to deliver yet another heavy package. Fancy cricket balls again, Emma supposed. Them's always having them expensive packages from all over the place. The amount of things they's buying, they must be made of money. Just as Emma handed Mr. Featherton, the cricket club secretary, the package, and he was about to sign for it, his telephone rang. An important business call, he declared with his nose in the air, and he walked into his office, leaving Emma and Rachel standing, waiting. Then, after listening to his telephone for a moment while saying nothing at all, he glanced nervously at the ladies and closed the office door on them. Both ladies prided themselves on minding their own business, of course, but the walls were not very thick, and you could hear quite a lot if you just happened to be leaning with your ear pushed against the door. It wasn't easy to hear everything he was saying, but they certainly got parts of it. What do you mean, dig it up? You can't be serious. Dig up the treasure? Why? What? What? None at all? But that's impossible. We can't be. We are? Oh no. Tonight? Midnight? The graveyard? Of course. Alone? Of course. Of course. Of course. And before he got to his last of course, both ladies were back on the other side of the lobby, waving at Singleton the dog through the window. By now, though, Mr. Featherton was looking very nervous indeed, and his hands were shaking as he signed Emma's form. So off drove Miss Emma and Rachel Nickleby to the Bananian Bugle, the island's one and only newspaper, where they told Milton Keynes, the editor, owner, reporter, cleaner, everything they'd heard. Well, they had to tell somebody. I mean, the information they'd just heard was much too much for two ladies to carry around all by themselves. Well, after hearing their revelation, Milton declared that this is all very sinister, digging up treasure, in the graveyard of all places, and that be church property. So any treasure there belongs to the church, not to Mr. Cricket Secretary and his shady friends. This, ladies, is a matter for the police, he declared. A police matter, a major police matter. And this will be a big scoop if the police arrests the church treasure robbers red-handed like. I can just see it now. Treasure robbers arrested. Brave reporter cracks the case. And us? Asked the ladies in unison. Yes, of course, my dear ladies, your names will certainly be mentioned. So off to the police station on Lower Back Street they all went. This was becoming a much more interesting day than Nigel's mother had dared hope for. Meanwhile, many miles away, in Euphonia, Banania's neighbouring island, Boris MacDonald, director of the Euphonian Intelligence and Educational Involvement Organisation, the EIEIO, was frustrated by the betrayal of their agent, codenamed Golden Eagle, also known as Clarence the Parrot, and also at the failure of Doris Dutherby, their most effective agent to ensnare Connor O'Connor, Digibeat's marketing director. Boris was convinced that the only way to get solid intelligence on what the Digibeat team were developing was by performing a flyover using sophisticated surveillance equipment. Sadly for Boris, the most sophisticated airborne surveillance equipment was a hot air balloon used to take tourists on a romantic and picturesque flight across Euphonia, so long as the wind was in the right direction, that was. So, taking along his most trusted lieutenant as photographer, the fearless Boris started to plan his mission, determined to discover what kind of technical treachery those Digibeat people were up to. Meanwhile, back to our other story on Banania. Postperson Emma and Nigel's mother were explaining to Sam Perkins, the island's detective, what they'd heard at the cricket club. Police officer Perkins immediately began making investigations on his computer about the cricket club's finances. He discovered that they'd been spending very large lots of money on cricket balls, ITs, etc., and etc. Well, Emma claimed to know every crook and nanny on the island, but never suspected them cricket club peoples. They's always very posh, and some of them is even white folks and Indians. This must be an organised crime syndicate, declared Sam Perkins. Very dangerous. And on our little island too. Well, Nigel's mum was delighted. Her day was certainly becoming more interesting by the minute. So late that night, our four heroes, the policeman, the newspaper man, and two heroic ladies, squeezed into the post office's mini moke and drove off to apprehend the treasure thieves. The graveyard was an eerie place at night, with sinister shadows and droopy trees, so Nigel's mum was happy to have a policeman and a reporter with them. As they made their way stealthily through the trees, they spied Mr. Featherton, the cricket club secretary. But with him was none other than Colonel Campbell, the cricket club chairman, all dressed in dark clothes and digging up a piece of the graveyard. What a clever place to bury treasure, thought Nigel's mum. The Caribbean was full of pirates' treasure after all. Well, Nigel's mum wanted to rush out and tackle them immediately, but the detective made them all wait silently until the villains had actually dug up something to be arrested for. Well, after a significant amount of digging, there was a clonk, distinctly like a shovel hitting a wooden box. The villains made much huffing and puffing and complaining that it was too heavy to lift out. Must be lots of treasure, thought Nigel's mum. Gold bars and jewels. How jolly exciting. Then, at his signal, both she and the policeman jumped out, with his flashlight shining in the thieves' eyes. He shouted out that they were both under arrest for trying to be stealing the church's treasure, what could be used for fixing up the church roof on account of the hurricane what blew it away 1.5 years ago. Milton Keynes was taking lots of photographs of the big moment, from a safe distance of course, on account of them being thieves and having shovels. Well, interestingly, the thieves seemed to be more annoyed than concerned at being arrested, but they gave a full confession on condition that nobody else heard about it at all, and it certainly wasn't to be in the newspaper. Well, it seems that there wasn't any treasure after all. But the box they were digging up was the coffin of the cricket club's late treasurer. Treasurer, not treasure. Got it? Well, it was an easy mistake for the ladies to make, well, especially if you can't clearly hear what was being said through the door. It had a very nice funeral with sandwiches and lots of appropriate speeches. Then the treasurer had been buried in this nice shady spot in the graveyard. The problem was, when they went to pay for the burial plot, they discovered that the cricket club had no money left. It appears that the late treasurer wasn't particularly good at his job, and he never really knew how much money the cricket club had or how much they were spending. So because nobody stopped them, they just kept on spending and more spending. And now they had no money left to pay for the gravesite. So they were going to have to bury the late treasurer in a more affordable part of the graveyard, and preferably without anyone knowing they had done it. Hence the now embarrassing midnight escapade. But then the club secretary and the chairman looked at each other, looked at the heavy coffin, and both appeared to have the same idea at the same time. Turning to the audience, they both became surprisingly warm and friendly. So, a short while later, the journalist and the detective found themselves helping the two men from the cricket club lift the heavy coffin out of the hole, while Nigel's mum held the flash lamp. They then carried the coffin to the other side of the graveyard and buried it in an inexpensive plot, actually right next to the town's rubbish dump. Well, nobody spoke on the way home in the mini moke. They were doubtless exhausted from all the excitement and carrying the heavy coffin, of course. But now back to our other story. The next morning, in the grounds of the Diggybeat headquarters at Manta Ray Bay Resort, the team were testing out a new tree-trimming hexacopter drone. This was designed to fly around trees, spot, analyse and chop off dead branches, with the aid of a rapidly rotating cutting blade. But not too far away and precisely on course to fly over the resort, Boris MacDonald and his companion were preparing the camera equipment, ready to photograph all the incriminating evidence at Diggybeat, which they were certain was Banania's secret weapons development centre. Well, so engrossed were they in preparing the equipment that they failed to notice the approach of what sounded like a swarm of insects, ascending rapidly from below and zooming up purposefully past the airborne basket. We can't really blame the drone for mistaking the cables of a hot air balloon for dead tree branches. They looked very, very similar. It was only doing what it was built to do after all, as it flew around the balloon, dutifully chopping the cables one by one, until the basket gradually tilted, then suddenly dropped with a resounding crash into the waiting treetops. Now Boris MacDonald and his trusty lieutenant were stranded high above the ground and a long way from home, victims, no doubt, of Banania's new state-of-the-art anti-hot air balloon weapon. A little later that same morning, and not far from the stranded spies, Ms. Emelina Johnson and Mrs. Rachel Nickleby were once more visiting the Banania Bugle newspaper office. As compensation for their small error, though she really didn't think it was all her fault, Ms. Emelina had kindly cooked Milton Keynes a boiled egg for his breakfast.